Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for being here. It's March the 4th, 2026, and we welcome everyone to this conversation about geothermal costs in support of the stakeholder conversation regarding the PNM 2026 Integrated Resource Plan. This is Margie Tatro with GridWorks, my colleagues Deborah Shields and Kathy Boyce here assisting with the facilitation. And we're glad you're all here. Appreciate the help of the Geothermal Working Group and of PNM and EPRI in formulating materials to be discussed at this office hour. We are recording, as you know, and the recording as well as the meeting materials are all posted on the GridWorks website. The link is below, and we've also put the link in the chat if anyone would like access to the slide materials that are being presented today. Deb, could you go to the next slide, please? Our objective today is really to understand geothermal cost estimate methodologies and assumptions. And it's possible we can identify some future collaborative actions that would be worthwhile to both the stakeholder community and to the utility. So after a quick introduction, we're going to ask the PNM EPRI team to describe their perspective regarding geothermal costs. After 10 minutes of that conversation, we'll then turn it over to Luke and Tom to discuss the Geothermal Working Group's perspective and information. And then we're going to just open it up for discussion amongst the people here and see what kind of understandings still need to be ferreted out, what kind of ideas folks have for future collaboration actions, and then we will adjourn at 4 o'clock. So the next slide shows that we are reminding folks of our norms. Please hold your questions until the discussion session after we've heard both from EPRI, PNM, and the Geothermal Working Group. Recall that this stakeholder input conversation is not a litigated proceeding, but really a chance to understand and provide input into the 3 areas that the IRP rule allows, and that is stakeholder modeling runs, statement of need, and action plan. Continue to be respectful in your comments. We appreciate that all that people are doing in that area, giving each other the benefit of the doubt. And given we do have quite a lot of people in the room, please share your ideas, but leave time for others. So with that, Deborah, let's go to the next slide, please. At this point, we'd like to turn the microphone and the slide decks over to PNM and EPRI, and I believe that perhaps Romy from EPRI will be the first speaker, but let me turn it over, Tom, you and Shane and Monique, if there's anything you wanted to add before Romy comes on, please add that at this point.
Yeah.
You go ahead. Yeah. Two different times, so I'm going to let you go.
Okay. Yeah, I was just going to say, welcome. Glad you're here. We have are not providing any information directly as PNM today because we have hired EPRI really to be our source of data for our geothermal modeling assumptions. Those modeling assumptions have been available for stakeholders out on our venue side and presented in our previous workshops in January. So some of that was things that stakeholders had indicated they would like to talk about. And so that kind of led to this office hours today. And I think from PNM's perspective, we may have some additional follow-up questions on location of geothermal that makes the most sense because we're trying to figure out how to fit that in, particularly to the transmission related part of figuring out the resource options. So anyway, at this point, I turn that over to Romy James from EPRI, who has been our support on the technology side of the geothermal.
All right, thank you. So I shared my files here on the WebEx. Is that the right way to do it? I saw the presentation went away.
We see it, Romy. We see it on our screen.
All right, sounds good. Just wanted to confirm. Okay, so good afternoon, and thank you for the opportunity to present here on this office hour. My name is Romy James. I lead EPRI's work on energy system technology, cost, performance, and techno-economic analysis. This project set is under a broader research program on resource planning for electric power systems. So the leader of that research program, Robin Badillion, is also on the line. And we also have Laura Chiaramonte, who leads EPRI's research on geothermal technologies. So she is the technical expert on these technologies. First, just a quick word on who we are. EPRI is an independent nonprofit research institute with a charter to serve the public benefit by conducting research to promote the advancement of safe, affordable, reliable, environmentally responsible electricity. And we have a collaborative model. So the idea is that if there are research needs that affect the entire industry, many utilities can fund research through EPRI rather than doing it all in-house individually. And that's more cost effective and ultimately benefits ratepayers. So here I'll provide a little bit of background on the specific questions that we're here to talk about today, how we generally develop technology cost and performance data for our members' IRPs and other modeling efforts. Our preferred method is to conduct or commission independent engineering studies. So for that, we would contract with an EPC firm to develop a bottoms-up cost estimate. For mature technologies, such as natural gas fire generation or wind or solar or batteries, we would look for an EPC firm who has recent experience deploying and building these kinds of power plants. So they would build their estimate based on their own recent experience. For more emerging technologies, we would look for an EPC firm who has relevant experience with adjacent technologies. So, for example, if we wanted a study on a particular kind of advanced nuclear reactor that hadn't been deployed, we might look for an EPC firm with other nuclear experience, and they would use publicly available information on the specific reactor type to develop a cost estimate as if they were going to build it. However, sometimes those strategies aren't available. So most recent times that we look to do that kind of a study with enhanced geothermal, the EPCs that we spoke to, independent engineering firms with experience in geothermal development, felt like there wasn't enough publicly available plant level data for enhanced geothermal to build a cost estimate that they would have confidence in. So in cases like that, we look for other independent sources. And in this case, we went with the NREL ATB database. But regardless of where we get the costs from, we like to harmonize them all with our technical assessment guide methodology, use our TagWeb software, and that ensures that all the costs are on the same level and like-for-like comparisons. So for example, some costs are just reported as overnight costs. Some are total capital required, including the allowance for funds used during construction or AFUDC. Some are just process costs that don't include owner's costs or contingencies. So that's the purpose of harmonizing them all with this methodology. So now to dive into the specifics of the geothermal data that we provided for this IRP. Like I said, we pulled it from NREL's most recent ATB, and we used the ranges for deep EGS binary plant, min, average, and max is shown on the chart here. And we use the deep EGS binary to represent a broadly deployable technology. There could be deployments at lower cost with near field EGS or flash plants at sites where there's hot geothermal resources close to the surface, but that would be limited in how much capacity could be deployed of those kind of plants. So that's why we use the deep EGS binary for the data input here. And then of that range of deep EGS binary plant, the full range includes a wide range of different regions, including some with very poor geothermal resources. And comparatively, the New Mexico region has pretty favorable geothermal resources, so that's why we chose the most optimistic of the most broadly deployable technology option. Here's a slide showing the technology status of different kinds of geothermal power plants. This is pulled from a report that we worked with NYSERDA on last year. So on the right, we have hydrothermal, very mature technology. It's been deployed for many decades now. Enhanced geothermal, we see it kind of on the edge of demonstration and commercial service. It has been successfully demonstrated at scale. So we would expect to see commercial deployments of enhanced geothermal systems in the near future. Don't see any technical barriers to those deployments. Closed loop geothermal is a bit less technically mature, has been validated at smaller scale plants, and a lot of the, or there's several technology developers who are working on full scale demonstrations currently. Closed loop geothermal does have potential technical advantages, but there are also some technical challenges that still need to be demonstrated as being overcome. So we'll be watching those demonstrations as they develop. And then super hot rock geothermal on the far left, less mature, not really a focus of the conversation here today. And this slide just addresses the timeline to deploy enhanced geothermal or advanced geothermal. This is pulled from the DOE's liftoff report on next generation geothermal, specifically the 2025 update. And it shows that under the current process, deploying a geothermal plant on public land could take between 7 and 10 years when you factor in all of these different steps. But there is a potential, what's labeled reformed next generation process, where that timeline could be compressed to 4 to 7 years. That hasn't been demonstrated yet, but we'll flag that the current administration has prioritized speeding up permitting processes. So certainly could see timelines compressed shorter than the top current process there. So that concludes my prepared remarks on the background and the specific assumptions that we made for the data that went into the IRP process here. Looking forward to getting more information from the geothermal community coming up here. And more broadly, just looking forward to more data becoming available as more of these deployments take place. So with that, I will turn the mic back over. Margie, you want to introduce the next speaker?
Yes, thank you, Romy. We'll take questions and discussions after this next 10-minute presentation from the Geothermal Working Group. I apologize, Tom Sullivan and Tom Duane. We have two important Toms on this call, so I appreciate the confusion. I apologize for that. At this point, I'd like to turn the presentation over. I think Luke Frasch will be doing the presentation for the Geothermal Working Group, but Tom Sullivan, is there anything you would like to do to introduce Luke? I'm not hearing any, so Luke, could you please share your slide and go ahead?
All right, can you hear me okay?
Yes.
All right, well, appreciate everybody's time here today. The geothermal is a topic that's near and dear to my interests, so I'm looking forward to seeing what its role will be in the near future and beyond. So a little bit about myself. I've been working on geothermal energy R&D for 16 years, mostly focusing on hot dry rock technologies, things like enhanced geothermal systems. And over the last 5 years or so, a major focus of mine has been on geothermal techno-economics. And there has been a lot of exciting advancements in the geothermal sector. in the last year to 2 to 3 years, where drilling costs have come down significantly, and as a result, it's really easy to be out of date very quickly with cost estimates looking forward to where this technology will go. So, and you can see my slides, are correct?
Luke,
RG?
can you change your view to a slideshow presentation so that they're a
Sure.
bit easier? That would be fabulous. Thank you so much.
Okay. Yeah, I like both ways of showing it. So here we go. So, at the very high level, one of the goals that the geothermal working group had today was to just see if we can update the cost metrics for geothermal, especially the capital cost metric. And bottom line up front, the IRP estimate currently appeared to be $15,700 per kilowatt. And with improvements in drilling technologies and other advancements that have occurred over the last 3 years, our current estimate is closer to $6,100 per kilowatt, which includes a 10% contingency. And then we also would recommend adding a estimate for hydrothermal capital cost as well, because there is a lot of geothermal potential in the state from what would be referred to as hidden geothermal systems, similar to what exists down at Lightning Dock in southern New Mexico. So we think that there are more of those resources to be found. And generally speaking, those are going to have a better capital cost for development. So this might be a little bit too high level for a lot of the audience here, but I did want to highlight some of the selling points of geothermal. One of the reasons why it can be a very exciting technology to use. And it is a renewable energy that comes from the heat of the earth. It has an incredibly tiny footprint for the surface area that's used compared to the amount of energy produced. And as a result, a very small impact on environmental factors. It actually has a very high number of jobs per megawatt ratio compared to other energy sources, which is really interesting. And it's a good technology that leverages existing oil and gas supply chains. And New Mexico has very healthy supply chains in that regard, which means it's well positioned for rapid growth in that area. It's baseload, dispatchable, always on, doesn't require fuel, and zero carbon. And then at the moment, it also benefits from a lot of incentives, investor interest, and bipartisan support from the state and federal level. So here I have a small video showing enhanced geothermal systems and the general process by which they're developed. And essentially what you do is you drill, you activate, create, or otherwise use natural fractures in the subsurface as a heat exchanger to extract heat and produce electricity. And for a lot of the analysis here, I focus on a pilot scale project because that would be the first to be constructed in the state, so the nearest term. And that would be a 3-well pattern with sand propped EGS as kind of the de facto base assumption. And depending upon the quality of the heat, it could be from 2.5 to 4 miles deep, about 7 megawatts or more per well triplet. And that can be expanded up to 100 megawatts for a single drill site. It's estimated to have a 30-year lifespan. Targeted temperatures will be 200 C and up. And when you factor in drilling costs, plant costs, and those factors, this particular pilot design would be about $50 million in capital, or $6,720 per kilowatt. On the right, there's a picture of Zanskar. I see some folks who are sitting in the office that are actually in that photo right now. But so glad to have you here. So you were asking about where we can build in New Mexico. New Mexico is actually blessed with some very good geothermal resources in terms of shallow heat. One of the holdbacks is going to be water supply because it's a relatively dry state. But in the northern portion of the state, there's a lot of known geothermal resources. There's one of the hottest geothermal resources in the whole country with the Valle Caldera. Granted, that's protected by the National Park Service. And then as you go down the Rio Grande Rift Valley, there's known geothermal resources through that area, all the way down to the southern end of the state. And then the southwest portion over by Lordsburg currently has the only operating geothermal power plant in the state. It was recently re-online to full capacity. And I'm also highlighting here some locations that seem particularly interesting, in part due to lease activity that has been increasing in those areas, and due to the resource that we expect to exist at those sites. So going back to the cost estimate for the IRP, I took a look at the NREL ATB, and in that, actually, I'll skip ahead to the next slide. In that ATB, they acknowledge here with this quote that I include, that they were decreasing the cost of capital for geothermal, especially deep EGS, with binary power cycles. They were reducing that cost from previous estimates, knowing that the drilling cost has gone down significantly, but they didn't actually rerun the analysis to account for just how far drilling technologies have gotten us today. So they were using a study from 2017 for how they were estimating the speed of drilling and ultimately the cost of drilling. And at that time, talking to my colleagues in the geothermal industry, a lot of people actually thought that 2017 estimate was optimistic. But if we go to today, it's not actually optimistic. It was pessimistic, which is pretty interesting and pretty exciting. So on the left, you can see the panel showing a converted version of what they present in the ATB, where I'm showing, instead of drilling rates and bit life, to a more direct number, which would be the cost per foot for well drilling and the dollars per kilowatt capex for a power plant that results from those assumptions. And when you update for modern drilling, you can see that the cost per foot has actually dropped dramatically in the last 3 years, down to one of the most recent projects was actually realizing close to $250 per foot of drilled well cost, all the way down to 22,000 feet in that case. And that brings the cost of the capex down from the Blue Mountain range, which is around 11,000, to potentially as low as 3,600. And this is So, and skip ahead a little more. Can you quickly tell me how much time I have left?
Yes, you've got 1.5 minutes left.
Okay, thank you. So in terms of the cost breakdown, I just wanted to show you a little bit about what's under the hood in a bottom-up analysis of the type that I would do on a regular basis. So here you're seeing a pie chart with the breakout of the different components of the cost of an enhanced geothermal systems facility. And this would include the full lifetime. So the upper right third of these slices are going to be the capital costs for the facilities, stimulation, connecting to the grid, drilling cost, and planning. And so there's actually a lot more detail I could show within each of these slices, but this is kind of a good high level view of what a 30 megawatt facility might cost from an EGS. And the bottom line here for this bottom up analysis is that we're looking at about $5,800 per kilowatt. For a hydrothermal facility, the stimulation cost goes away. The drilling cost increases a little bit because it's a more challenging drilling environment, but it doesn't increase to be more than EGS drilling because you don't have to do directional and these other more fancy things. I did increase the grid connection cost a little bit for hydrothermal because you have less control of the location of one of these facilities than you would for an EGS scenario where you could co-locate it closer to the customer or node for the grid. And for the hydrothermal costs, I'm estimating around $4,600 a kilowatt. I could also go into detail, but we'll save this for the discussion about geothermal in the context of alternatives from analysis that I did. It'd be good to get feedback from EPRI and kind of see where we want to go with that. And then this is just talking about recent news releases on the topic of geothermal and, kind of the rising excitement that's going on in the industry, as well as a lease map showing areas in the southern portion of the state that are being put up for BLM auction. And then there's some proposed ones in the northern portion of the state too. So I'll just kind of throw this back up there to conclude with my bottom line up front now at the end. You want me to stop sharing now or keep this up?
You can stop sharing. Thanks, Luke. We may need to come back to that, but thank you so much. At this point, we'd like to open up conversation about both sets of materials. Really, a couple of key things we'd like people to comment on. Where is there agreement? Where is there difference? And let's start with those two topics, where there's agreement and where there are differences. I see there is a question in the chat going quickly to the TEA comparison across energy sources. Adam, I'm going to ask that we hold that off because I don't want to distract the conversation to topics that really are not the focus of this office hour. Maybe in the future we could go back, but I really want to focus our conversation on the geothermal at this point. So if we have time, we'll go back to that. Thanks, Adam, for your tolerance to that. So please, anyone on the call, please raise your hand if you want to comment on agreements or differences from a facilitation perspective. We see that there's, the range of enhanced geothermal costs that EPRI presented and PNM is using in their low to high case is about at the lowest end twice the cost of what the geothermal working group is suggesting, the $15,000 per kilowatt hour at the low end, as opposed to the $6,100 per kilowatt from the geothermal working group. But I would like to go ahead and open up for questions. I see Darren, you have the first question. Please go ahead. Oh, maybe Luke already responded. Go ahead, Darren, do you want to expand on your question?
Okay, 7-inch. Okay. That's, yeah, I was curious because, I permitted the Lightning Dock 17 Bravo well that ever drilled. It was supposed to be the deepest in the state, but they ended up breaking off the drill stem at 18,000 feet. Still got down a ways, but they learned a lot of things in that project. And they had a rig from the Permian Basin come over and do that well, and they were there from August to the end of the year, and blew through about $20 million drilling an 18,000 foot well that has no production value whatsoever. So I think there's a lot of risk that we're not accounting for. That well hole, I think, is a 12-inch hole, casing. So that's also larger than what you're assuming there, and that makes a big difference, especially if we're using drill rigs from the Permian that are used to 4-inch boreholes. So there, there's some questions there about the validity of the costs and the risk factors that we have with geothermal, because you are going into the unknown. And sure, they learned a lot from that, but it's there are a lot of those oops. And CERC before that drilled a lot of injection wells in their hydrothermal plant that didn't produce for injection. So there's a lot of hidden costs in geothermal that I think people need to be aware of also. So thank you.
Great, thanks, Darren. I see Joe Chandler has your hand raised. Go ahead, Joe.
Just to follow off what Darren was saying is, I agree there are things that are getting there, there's considerations, but I'm not sure that those are really reflected in the numbers that are being used right now as much as they're using outdated numbers. from where things were. And so when you talk about that, like the technology and everything has come away from what Luke was sourcing there and showing these updated things that's kind of baked into the numbers. Can you help parse out how much of the numbers that are currently being used are associated with those higher costs and how that was kind of quantified in those numbers?
Joe, who is your question directed at, please?
I guess a little bit more towards Darren, because he was coming in talking about lightning dot costs and everything and how that was different. And I was wondering if he could talk on, is he saying that the numbers that are currently being used better because they're baking that in, and how exactly is that baked into those higher numbers is really what I was kind of looking for him to expand on.
No, Joe, no, I'm not sure what those numbers are based on. I'm kind of in the dark like you too. I'm just trying to understand what goes into that. But I was just, even if you agree on the drilling numbers, there are inherent risks in all geothermal development because you don't know what the situation is, 3 miles below the surface. That was a big problem with that lightning dot well, was they lost circulation 7,000 feet down, didn't regain it for 3,000 feet. Now, in some ways, that was a pleasant surprise, but it caused a lot of heartburn at the time that they had to deal with. And those costs, like I said, they blew through $20 million pretty quickly drilling that well. And it's not productive to this day. So
I guess, along that line, what I would offer up though is the most recent well that Zanskar didn't encounter those problems, utilize that information, and certainly up the curves closer to what Luke was putting in there. And so if we're looking at historical data points, I think we need to use the most current ones in order to base our calculations that we're using for overall grid planning.
Okay, great. Thank you, Joe.
And I can add on a little bit if you like.
Yeah, please do.
Yeah, so it's a very valid concern, and the uncertainty regarding the drilling cost, and it's a very difficult thing to quantify right now, especially given that advancements have been so rapid in the last 3 years. So, the geothermal industry, what went into the Lowry 2017 report, that drilling data was based off of geothermal drilling data, which is typically in very high loss zones because that's where the resources are for conventional geothermal. And it's abrasive rock. It's some of the most challenging drilling that you can do is those large diameter, high loss zone drilling areas. So the drilling rates do tend to be slower and more expensive in those types of environments. Enhanced geothermal systems is unique in a way where it actually works better in geologies where there is very low natural loss tendencies. So very competent rock, not these huge fractures that take all your fluid away. So it actually works more economically if you don't have that. And the result of that is that your drilling is actually much simpler and cheaper, and you can get down deep faster and easier. So like the Glade wells that were to 22,000 feet in Platteville, Colorado, there was 2 wells that they sunk down. It was about 80 days to get those 2 wells all the way down to TD, and that included some directional drilling. It's a little bit faster than what we've been seeing in other areas, but the story has been consistent so far that when you're drilling in competent areas, the drilling rates can be quite fast. So at least that gives me some confidence that the drilling rates need to be updated towards a lower cost side of things.
Great. Thanks, Luke, for expanding. I see that Glenn and Eric have their hands up. Let's start with Glenn and then go to Eric.
Yeah, sure. I wanted to focus on the agreement question, but on a couple of the parameters that I saw in the slides. One of them was the 30-year lifetime. And the other one was the word dispatchable. To me, dispatchable means firm dispatchable capacity that you could bid into a PNM RFP. And so I guess I'm directing this question to PNM. Do you agree that it's firm dispatchable power, and do you agree with a 30-year lifetime, and would you model it that way?
Or IRP or RFP? Sounded like Glenn, this is Lori. Yeah, we'd love for it to bid into an RFP, and it has not thus far. At any time have we had it bid into an RFP, so there's no geothermal actual data for us. I think the only data I've seen of late that's actually from the market is the information that XGS was putting out with their press release on the Meta project, which was somewhere, depending on which press release you look at, 1.2 billion to 1.5 billion for 150 megawatts. So you can do the division on that in terms of the dollar per kW for installed. But yes, I think we would model what people are bidding and what we think is a reasonable technical viable option in the modeling.
Lori, sorry, this is Kathy Boyce. Can you expand a little bit? How are the generic cost assumptions used to inform or not inform the RFP?
So they don't inform the RFP. But I thought Glenn's question was on if PNM would accept these, and we are doing a firm generating resource RFP coming up in which geothermal can bid. So that will be something, assuming that these are really commercially ready in the way that folks are saying. I'm not sure why it didn't bid last year, but I'd be curious to see if we get bids this year. Separate from that, the IRP modeling, I think we look at what our data is and what we're getting from EPRI, and certainly would look at sensitivities from stakeholder requests.
So I think Glenn's question, though, was specifically related to the lifetime and dispatchability. I realize, Lori, that until you have a project bid into an RFP, you don't know those parameters, but do you have a perspective on those two characteristics at this point?
I'll ask the team. It's probably closer to the data than I am.
I don't know if we have a perspective on the actual life that a new geothermal facility would have. I think we would need to do some more research on that, probably rely on EPRI to help us understand that also. So that's from the lifetime perspective. On the dispatchability, I mean, we have a question on that as well. We know that geothermal is typically going to be running around the clock and trying to maximize the amount of energy you get out of that facility. But in terms of actually calling on it or PNM actually wanting to dispatch that facility, we don't know we don't know what the ranges of operation really are. And so that's something that we would need to discuss with specifics with bidders if they were to bid in an RFP on that type of information for a specific facility.
Great. Thank you. Glenn, you may have another question after Eric. Eric Hebo from New Mexico. Would you like to pose your question?
Yes, thanks. I have a question for Luke, and it's on the slide 6 of his deck, and I'm trying to understand in the current estimate, you've got $1 per foot leads to a capex that's $1 per kW, and then you have very specific projects on today's drilling cost. You have a higher $1 per foot and a lower capex. And I'm wondering, is it a shallow, really high quality resource? I don't see how you can map from the left side of your table to the right. I'm not sure if it makes sense to flash that slide up to everybody, but I just don't understand how that's a valid comparison.
Yeah, let me share that screen again.
Yeah, could you bring that back up, please? Thank you.
Hopefully this is sized appropriately so everybody can see it. Yeah,
great.
that's a good point in terms of why that would look like a disconnect. So there's more to it than just the drilling cost that's going into these analyses. So like on the left side, that's going to be from NREL's ATB for their conservative, moderate, and advanced scenario for their 2033 forecast, extracted from the 2024 B ATB. And there's going to be additional cost factors embedded into the conservative versus advanced side of things, other than just the drilling, right? And then on the right side, the CapEx is being estimated from the drilling cost being the really only variable that's changing, and then the plant cost and those kinds of things are coming from a more standardized assumption set that's not being skewed towards a conservative or a ideal scenario. It's just kind of like in the mean of what people have been observing for, the cost of building an organic Rankine power plant, for example. So,
Great. And so do you
a few other
scale those
factors.
up to 2033 as well? Or are those today costs or yesterday
Those are
costs?
today's cost, yeah.
Got it. Okay. Thank you.
Brian, you've got your hand up. Were you trying to respond to one of the other questions from PNM, or is it a different topic? Let me ask Brian.
I just had a question on page or slide 8 on the pie chart.
Slide
For,
8. Thank you.
Yep, got it. Slide 8, you said.
Yeah, the pie chart, does that show total capital required? And if it does, it looks like it's at 15,000 and some change per KW.
So if you add up the right hand slide here, right?
Yeah,
So
the left-handed,
yeah, 2,800, 1,300 again, and then the smaller numbers.
Mm-hmm.
Brian, answer your question.
Yeah, my question was, when adding up those, so if I were to put these into the model for total capital required, let's say starting in 2026, would I then put $15,000 per KW if I summed up all those values in the pie chart?
Okay, sorry. And to clarify a little bit further, the pumping cost and the operations, those are not capital costs.
Okay, so I
They're
guess your capital.
lifetime operational costs.
Okay. So your capital cost is just that one top right third that you were talking about earlier?
Yep, and then the total, when you sum them up, unless I made a mistake in my math, should be 5,800 or thereabouts.
Okay, thank you.
Great, thanks, Brian. I see Gwen has her hand up, and then we'll call on a representative from Zanskar. Not sure the name of the person, but let's start with Gwen, then go to Zanskar, and then I see Barbara has a question after that. So Gwen, please go ahead.
Hi, I have a couple questions. One is I think we've seen some compelling information on that the 2017 estimates may be overly conservative. It may be reasonable to use the lower cost estimate for geothermal in the modeling, in the IRP modeling. And I'm just wondering, what is the risk of doing that, considering that there will be an RFP, and there will be, that RFP will be open to bids. And so what we would see from modeling in this this IRP presentation that we're discussing using a hypothetical cost estimate, we would see an example of what the system could look like, with geothermal on the system and without, kind of over reliance on gas if there are opportunities for geothermal. And so just wondering what the risk is and kind of what perhaps the utility could do to remove any possible barriers for geothermal projects to bid. For example, if the, online date for the project is too limiting in the RFP for some geothermal projects, or if there are ways to clarify in the solicitation documents the types of performance data that you will need from bidders for geothermal projects. And I heard a couple of those aspects of performance data that would be useful for the modeling of actual bids. So a few questions there, but just really interested initially in that question about the, what's the risk of using that lower number?
I think from PNM's perspective, we like to be sure our numbers have come from a source that's been out there and working incredible for a while. We are continuing the discussion with EPRI on the costs we're using, but I think we feel those still belong as the cost that we will use as the base, and we are encouraging this particular issue to consider asking for some stakeholder scenarios to look at those lower costs. And that'll show for sure what the benefits are and how geothermal ranks among other supply alternatives.
And I think to answer your question, Gwen, I don't see a risk. I think
Right.
if we model it at $5,800, model it $15,000, whatever it is, regardless of what comes out, the RFP will be what gets bid, what actually commercially is available and willing to stand behind its pricing and performance and sign contracts to that end. That's really where the rubber meets the road for all intents and purposes. But I think it's good to understand what that looks like in the geothermal in the big picture, and having the stakeholder view, having the EPRI view. I think we can cover those bases and get good intelligence on how that performs and what that looks like in our portfolios and our scenarios, and go from there. But I very much hope if it's as viable as they say, we would start actually getting some real bids rather than just discussion of it being viable, but no one bidding.
But if I could just react to that, I think there is a risk of using the value that is too conservative, because then you may end up in the modeling just kind of like excluding and not really looking at geothermal in that modeling. You might miss out on better understanding of the type of information that would be useful to have in the solicitation documents. And you might actually create an expectation or assumption that, kind of the typical gas thermal generation resources are going to be the primary resources that would be needed to serve a dispatchable need, and kind of create that expectation. We see that, utilities might just like desire to build gas because the initial IRP modeling showed gas as a selected resource. And so I think there's more of a risk of using using an overly conservative geothermal value than there is a risk of using in a more recent value as Luke has presented today. So thank you.
Great, thank you, Gwen. I think let's go to the representative from Zanskar. Will you please introduce yourself and please go ahead with your question? I want to remind folks that we're trying to identify those places where we have agreement and differences. Thanks.
Yeah, excellent. I'm Jake Gong. I'm the head of commercial strategy here at Zanskar with members of the Zanskar team. And on that part of agreement versus disagreement, I did hear differing narratives being presented about how much hidden resources there are. And from our perspective, Zanskar has already discovered far more hidden resources in the US than anyone thought was possible. And we think that Luke's narrative that there is huge amounts of undiscovered cheap hydrothermal potential is the narrative that should be more celebrated within this IRP. And so reviewing some of the materials beforehand, there were call outs about questions about whether or not hydrothermal capacity was enough to even plan for. And we just want to make sure it's clear that there actually is. We think that even by 2030, we could have more hydrothermal capacity than you have coal capacity in the state. So I think that as far as a disagreement, there seem to be disagreeing narratives even within the presentations today, and we hope that there's more alignment or agreement on the fact that there is a lot of potential there that New Mexico should be put into its plans. I agree with what Gwen was saying there, that if we don't, and we have this narrative that there is an abundance there, then people won't plan for it and they'll look to alternative, more carbon intensive resources when you actually could go for proven cheap hydrothermal resources.
Great, thank you. I just want to say I heard the PNM team say they're willing to look at a different cost profile for geothermal in the stakeholder requested modeling run. I hear Gwen asking for that perhaps to be accelerated into a base case, but I did also hear that there's agreement that PNM would be willing to look at a different cost figure for geothermal in the stakeholder modeling run request. I just wanted to point that out for folks. Let's go to Barbara and Tom.
Okay.
And
okay, yes, thank you. Being not a tech person, but it does seem to me that geothermal is one of the options as it becomes available to affect ways of dealing with time of use problems or periods of time when the renewables we depend on the most at the moment, being solar and wind, could be mitigated on behalf of customers if we had such an option. So I'm wondering how much weight geothermal would get in the modeling, because it could perhaps provide that backstop. And then my secondary question to that is how much capacity PNM would need from geothermal.
Answer that question. So Barbara,
Leveling
we're
the
not
time
going to
of
put any
use.
special weights or, put more pressure on one resource than another. What we're trying to do is we're trying to model what we know the best set of resources are out there at the best cost we know today. And we want our modeling to show what would be the best for our customers based on the peak demands that we expect to see and the energy requirements. So it goes back to, we really want to put in the best cost estimates for these different technologies, so that when we actually if we do need to issue an RFP, we're asking for the right types of resources and at the right times. On your second question, I mean, we're not gonna, we're gonna let these resources, the characteristics of them play out, and they're gonna play out against each other for all the different types of technologies. So we really want to let, we're technology agnostic, and we really want to let the software modeling that we use try to help guide us to the best decision making there.
I think I kind of understand that, but because there are certain parameters of when you have power and when you don't, how does that become a factor in choosing preferences, even as you've described, letting the technology fall where it may?
Yeah, and we're looking at hourly shapes for the next 20 years for what the load and energy requirements are. And so the best set of resources to meet those requirements at the lowest cost, and we also have to balance environment. We also have to balance affordability. So we did take those things into account, and all those things will be coming out of the software modeling that we're going to be using. So we just try to get the best set of resources to use and put in there as generic candidates and let them compete against each other. So, I know what you're trying to say is, how does that meet the requirements? Well, we kind of let those characteristics of those resources do their thing, and then we want to know what that best mix looks like.
All right, thank
Great,
you. I'll be watching.
Thank you. We have 5 minutes left, and I wanted to just calibrate where we are at this point. One thing we hoped to identify today is where there are topics that we can approach as a group collaboratively. I have heard a couple of things. I have heard ideas for using different lower costs for enhanced geothermal that can be incorporated in a sensitivity and model run by stakeholders. I've heard discussion about where geothermal resources might be accessible. And I think it would be interesting to have a conversation at a future date about how that overlays with PNM's transmission infrastructure. We won't do that today. And I'm also hearing from Gwen the possibility of an action plan item where there's stakeholder input on what kind of language might be worth considering in a future RFP that allows a geothermal to be integrated in that RFP. Even in an all source RFP, there may be some description of that resource that stakeholders feel should be considered when an RFP is issued. Kathy, I'd like to ask you, are there other things that you've heard today that would be possible collaborative topics?
No, I think you captured what I heard as well. Thank you.
Great. So I see there are several hands up, and I think given that we've allocated another 3 minutes to this conversation, I would like to ask first Tom Solomon to be able to offer his comments, and then go back to Tom Duane to summarize what his thinking is. We will ask that others who have questions that we were not able to get to, please type those into the chat. We are working on a process for capturing and responding to questions that don't have time during our office hours and workshops. So please, Tom Solomon, go ahead. Please then, Tom Duane, offer your perspective, and others. I apologize, we haven't gotten to get back to Glenn, Emma, or Randy, and we're going to ask that you put your specific questions regarding geothermal costs into the chat. Please, Tom Solomon.
Thank you, Margie. And I think I'd agree with your outline and summation at the end. I think we'd definitely like to see the sensitivity analysis with the lower cost for enhanced geothermal included in that, and that would be a significant outcome of this meeting. As to the previous discussions about, when enhanced geothermal is going to be actually filling out bid documents for an RFP, I think we are not quite ready for that. The very first of a kind utility scale enhanced geothermal system is being built right now in Utah at Fervo Cape Station with their phase 1, 100 megawatts, nearly complete in construction, coming on probably the middle of this year. And then according to their schedule, another full 500 megawatts by 2028. So that's the time frame for the first of a kind of this new kind of technology. And, you would see some follow-on projects in the coming years. I think it's likely that, bidding into a PNM RFP for enhanced geothermal would be, towards the end of this decade, early in the 2030s, as a realistic possibility. However, I agree with Zanskar as, they are finding hidden hydrothermal, much more easily developed resources in the state and in others with their, their enhanced AI subsurface detection technology. And that is much easier to develop. It is, as we said, an existing technology. It operates at, there's gigawatts of hydrothermal in operation today in the United States. And if they are successful, those bids could come out in the more intermediate time frame. So I think both of those things are cases that we'd want to look for. And let's be realistic about when we want to bring, geothermal into the portfolio, but it's definitely ready to be included as options in this 20-year horizon that we're talking about in the current IRP. And that's the objective that we wanted to accomplish here today. Thank you.
Thank you, Tom, and thank you for helping us organize this conversation. Tom Dwayne, would you like to offer any comments from PNM before we close with announcement of our next workshop?
Yeah, we certainly appreciate the conversation. I did want to mention on the hydrothermal that we're certainly willing to consider adding that as a technology review in this. It sounds like the discussion here feels that might be more feasible in a shorter time frame. We will have to get the parameters and get those out there of what we would use for that, but we will offer that up if that addresses the things from Zangar and Tom Sullivan there. In terms of a hydrothermal, we assume you're referring to a binary technology there.
Most likely, yes.
And then I guess we'd like some guidance on where would you want us to consider the location. We'd really like to tie these technologies to 1 or 2 locations for the IRP process, so we can get some sense of the challenges on the transmission side. Much of the PNM transmission system, unfortunately, does not align well with the geothermal locations. So that's kind of an area we're looking for guidance on. But anyway, we'd offer that up there, and I don't know whether that's something that might be bid into the upcoming RFP we're planning to submit or not, but there is an opportunity for that technology to be bid in there coming up here pretty quickly.
Yeah, that's exciting to see.
Great. So Tom, how would you, both Toms, how would you, Tom and Tom, like to continue this discussion offline, particularly about the information you need on hydrothermal resources and the locations of any of these? How do you, I imagine you want, how would you like to proceed with that conversation?
Let me take that back.
Okay, go ahead, Tom. Yeah.
Let me take that back, but you know, we still stick with the sources we've been working with and looking at the credible information for getting modeling data. It's my impression that the sources are considerably lower cost on the hydrothermal at this point, and we would just need to get that down, get it out to stakeholders.
But could the working group suggest the locations it wants to see modeled?
Yeah.
I guess we could. I'd like to include Zanskar as probably the most knowledgeable in that area, but also in Luke Frash's, I think, final 1 or 2 slides, there was a very interesting BLM leasing document map showing where candidates are nominating parcels in and around Doña Ana County for geothermal development. I don't think they specify of what kind, but that means that there are companies out there looking in those areas and saying, we think this location is it's enticing as a possibility. So that should be part of the inputs. Whatever Zanskar is willing to disclose about what they found in their investigations, and you know, what we know about where the heat is in the subsurface. I guess that's what we could do.
Right. Well, perhaps we should look to Tom, the working group, as well as discussion with Zanskar, to ask you all to provide that input into PNM. So please, let's keep that conversation going amongst you. It sounds like PNM is interested in the information. So Tom, Dwayne, was there anything else you wanted to add?
No, I think we're pretty good at this point. Does anybody else have anything further they'd like to add? I think we're pretty set here and really appreciate the discussion.
Great. Thank you. Well, we just want to put a thank you to everybody for being here. The conversation was excellent. Our next workshop of the full stakeholder group is March 11th from 9 to 12 via WebEx. The materials for that are being prepared. There's quite a bit of conversation about having different opportunities for conversation and a clearer process for handling question and answer. So you can look for some description of what we're going to switch to in workshop 4. We'll also get an update on any modeling results to date. and we'll go ahead with some kickoff conversations about stakeholder requested modeling runs, of which it sounds like geothermal cost sensitivity is going to be a great one. So with that, let me say thank you to everybody. Please, you can find the recording and these materials on the GridWorks website, and we look forward to seeing you in March on the, well, just next week, March 11th. Thanks so much. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thank you.